Good evening, everyone. Let's gather around the campfire and get comfortable. I've got 3 short stories for this video. First up, we have Whispers in the Trees. I never wanted to go on this trip. It was Adam's idea. He had this romanticized notion of hiking the Appalachian Trail. Unplugging from the modern world, he called it. Emily was excited too, always up for the adventure. And Derek never backed down from anything that involved showing off his outdoorsman skills. That left me, the odd one out, the guy who'd rather be home with a beer and a movie, but they wouldn't let me back out. So, on a crisp October morning, the 4 of us set out from the trailhead in North Carolina, packs loaded with supplies, hearts filled with anticipation. The plan was a 3-day loop, deep into the wilderness where cell service was a memory and civilization a distant hum. The first day was easy. The trees were a canvas of red and gold, the air cool but pleasant. We made camp near a small stream, built a fire, laughed, swapped stories. I won't lie, I started to enjoy it. The disconnect from the world felt freeing. But that night, I woke up to something strange. It was nearly silent, except for the occasional rustling of the leaves. Not the wind, something deliberate. Footsteps? I sat up in my tent, heart hammering. Probably a deer, I told myself. But the sound wasn't moving like an animal. It circled our camp, slow and deliberate. When I finally mustered the courage to peek out, I saw nothing but skeletal shadows of trees. The next morning, I mentioned it to the group over breakfast. Probably just a raccoon, Derek said dismissively. Emily looked uneasy. It didn't sound like an animal. Adam, ever the peacemaker, chuckled. We're in the middle of the woods. It's probably just nature playing tricks on you. I let it go, but an uneasy feeling settled in my gut. The second night. We hiked deeper the next day, the trail becoming more rugged. By late afternoon, we reached the ridge overlooking a misty valley. The view was breathtaking. We set up camp in a small clearing near the ridge. That night, sounds came back. Lying in my tent, I heard it, soft, crunching footsteps weaving between the trees. I held my breath, straining to hear. The sound circled us again, closer than before. Then the whispering started. I couldn't make out the words, but they were low and urgent, carried by the wind, like a secret meant to stay hidden. I wasn't the only one who heard it. Emily shot up in her tent. Did you hear that? Yeah, I whispered back. A flashlight flicked on Derek's tent. What the hell is that? Adam unzipped the tent and shined his flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but empty woods. Probably the wind, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. None of us slept much that night. The third day. We debated turning back, but Derek was against it. We're probably just freaking ourselves out. Let's finish the loop. We'll be out of here tomorrow. I didn't want to argue, so we pressed on. But the deeper we went, the more the woods felt wrong. No birds, no squirrels, just silence. And the whispering. By late afternoon, we stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. A small clearing at the center of which stood a circle of stones arranged with unsettling precision. Inside the ring, sticks and bones were lashed together into strange humanoid figures. We need to leave, Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek scoffed. It's just some backwoods folk art. Relax. Adam, looking uneasy, nodded. Yeah, let's just keep moving. We hurried past the clearing, not looking back. The final night. Dread hung over us as we made camp. None of us spoke much. Even Derek seemed subdued. That night, it came closer. The whispers grew clearer, threading through the trees like ghostly fingers. They weren't in any language I recognized, but they weren't nonsense either. It sounded like chanting. Then a twig snapped. Adam bolted up, light flashlight in hand. Who's there? Silence. Another snap, closer this time. Then Emily screamed. She pointed to the edge of camp, her face pale with terror. We all turned, flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing. But the whispering didn't stop. It was everywhere now, surrounding us. Something moved in the trees, shifting just beyond the reach of our lights, a shadow, tall and thin. We need to go, I said, grabbing my pack. Now. We didn't bother packing the tents, we just ran. Flashlights bouncing wildly, the whispering followed, growing frantic, urgent, the footsteps closer, and suddenly, it stopped. We burst out into the wider trail, panting, hearts pounding. The woods behind us were still, the whispering had vanished. We didn't stop until we reached the car. The aftermath. None of us spoke much on the drive back. We never really talked about it after either. Not in detail. What was there to say?
Derek, he tried to rationalize it.
Echoes in the trees, trick of the mind. But he didn't sound convinced. Adam stopped camping altogether. Refused to hike alone again. And me? I still hear the whispering sometimes. In the dead of night, when the world is still, I swear I hear it, low and urgent, calling from the dark. I don't go into the woods anymore. If you enjoyed that first story, hit the like button, and if you want more stories like this on your feed, subscribe and ring the notification bell while you're down there. Now for our second story. The Horror Beneath. Arrival at Antarctica Station. The first thing I noticed about Antarctica Station was how wrong it felt. Antarctica is always silent, but this was different. The air was thick, heavy with a presence we couldn't name. We arrived at the abandoned Nazi research base under orders to investigate and document it before the ice reclaimed it for good. Officially, it was a standard historical expedition, a relic of the past, but the classified documents we had all been given told a different story. Antarctica wasn't just another forgotten war-era outpost, it was something else. There were 6 of us. Dr. Alan Carter, our lead scientist, a geophysicist. Dr. Elena Morales, a biologist, skeptical of the mission but too intrigued to refuse. Levin and Anderson, they were engineers. Dr. Olivia Harlow, a historian obsessed with Nazi occult experiments. And me, Daniel Holt, geologist with a deep, gnawing feeling that the digital watches we wore, they were all off, some by minutes, some by hours. And then we realized something even worse. Wait, Morales muttered, rubbing her temples. What did we do today? We all froze. I tried to remember. I should have remembered, but my mind was blank. We had set up camp, we had started our research, and then nothing. The entire day was gone. Paranoia. That was when we started turning on each other. Carter blamed Anderson, Anderson blamed Harlow, Harlow accused me of playing some kind of trick. We're just tired, Morales said, but she didn't sound convinced. That night, I heard something breathing outside my room. A slow, deep inhalation. I pressed my ear to the door, heart pounding, silence. I stepped out into the hallway, that dim emergency lights flickering. At the far end of the corridor, I saw the horror move. A shape, a figure. Its limbs were wrong, too long, bending in ways that shouldn't have been possible. And then I woke up in my bed. I sat up, drenched in sweat. I could still feel my pulse hammering in my ears. My door was locked. It had never been opened. Had I dreamed it? Missing time. Days passed, or maybe it was hours. None of us could tell anymore. We lost entire chunks of time, entire conversation, entire meals. We'd be talking one moment and then suddenly we're in different rooms, wearing different clothes. And the worst part? No one remembered moving. This place is getting to us, Carter muttered. It's in our heads. Then Anderson vanished. We searched the station for hours, but it was like he had never been there at all. His bunk was empty, his gear untouched. He left, Levin insisted. He had to have left. Into a storm, Harlow snapped. Without his coat, without his radio? None of it made sense. And then the radios went dead. The horror beneath. I saw the horror again, not in the halls, not in a dream, in the reflections. The metal walls of the stations were warped, rusted, but sometimes in the right light, I could see the horror moving behind my reflection. Figure, a thing shifting, twisting, curling into impossible shapes. Every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. I stopped looking into the mirrors after that. Morales wasn't so lucky. She was staring into the frost-covered window when I heard her whisper, "It's watching us. I grabbed her by the shoulders. What did you see? She turned to me. Her eyes were black. She smiled, and then she was gone. The last ones left. Harlow stopped speaking. She sat in her bunk for hours staring at the wall, whispering in German. Levin broke the radio trying to send an SOS. No one's coming, he muttered. Carter locked himself in the storage room. That night, I heard a sound outside my door, a wet, slithering sound. I gripped my knife. When I stepped into the hall, I saw footprints in the frost. Footprints that led to my room. Not from, to. That was the first time I truly understood. The horror wasn't just here. The horror was inside. Escape. Carter was gone by morning. Levin swore he saw him standing outside in the snow, staring back at the station. He opened the door to go after him. I tackled him before he could step outside. That's not Carter, I hissed. Levin sobbed. We both knew the truth. We weren't alone anymore. I don't remember running. I don't remember getting to the surface. I just remember waking up in the snow, my lungs burning. A rescue team found me. They asked what had happened, where my team was. I told them the cold took them, that I barely escaped. They believed me, but I knew the truth. I was not Daniel Holt anymore. The horror had left the ice, and now the horror wears my face. I hope you enjoyed the horror. Now for our final story for this video, The Outer Dark, Chapter 1, The Hunt Begins. The silent spear dropped out of faster-than-light travel on the edge of the Riho 9 expanse, a dead zone on the galactic maps. Few ships came back from here. Those that did spoke of strange transmissions and missing crews. Inside the dimly lit war room, the hunting party gathered. 6 figures stood around a holographic display of Exfos 13, the unexplored planet where an exploratory team had sent one last desperate distress signal before falling silent. At the head of the group stood Vorkish, the massive reptilian war hunter of the Sithkar Dominion. His black scales gleamed under the hollow light, arms crossed, eyes cold and predatory. Beside him, Tazrik, the chitorous insectoid with serrated hunting blades, clicked his mandibles in impatience. Morvash, the feline huntress, flexed her claws absently. Ulrin, the armored brute of Urix, grunted as he scanned the transmission logs. Halis, the wraith-like stalker, hovered in eerie silence. And then there was Daniel Carter, the human. Dan could feel their unspoken judgment. He had felt it since day one. The Galactic Senate saw humans as adaptable, but not exceptional. He knew why they had let him come. They didn't expect him to be an asset. They expected him to fail. Dan clenched his jaw. He had no intention of failing. They thought he was weak, slow, fragile. They had no idea. Earth's gravity was nearly twice the galactic average. The others didn't realize what that meant. His muscles were denser, his bones stronger, his endurance ridiculous by their standards. He wasn't the strongest in the room, but pound for pound, he was far more capable than they assumed. He was going to prove it. The distress beacon pulsed red in the hologram. This is where the explorer's last signal originated, Vorkish growled. No life signs, no comms, no escape pod launches. Dan studied the layout of the land. Dense jungle, cliffs, steep ravines, a predator's paradise. No bodies, he asked? Ulrin shook his head. None detected. Dan exhaled. They weren't just killed, they were hunted. The others turned to him. Tazrik's mandibles twitched. What makes you think that, human? Dan met his gaze evenly. Because if it was just a mindless predator, we'd see bodies, blood trails, leftover corpses. This isn't a massacre, it's a game. A moment of silence. Then Morkish let out a low chuckle. Maybe the human knows more than we thought, Dan smirked. You have no idea. The ship descended. Chapter 2, Into the Wild. The air was thick, heavy. Dan could feel it pressing against his skin as he moved through the jungle. Exfos 13 was a death world by any definition. The trees were massive, their obsidian trunks smooth and alien, stretching endlessly towards the sky. Strange bioluminescent flora pulsed with faint blue light. The ground was soft, each step felt like walking on something that wanted to swallow you whole. Dan adjusted his rifle and moved in formation with the others. He wasn't the largest, he wasn't the fastest, but he moved with efficiency, his steps calculated, his breathing controlled. The others barely noticed. Good, let them underestimate him. Morvash crouched suddenly, feline pupils dilating as she scanned the ground. Tracks, she whispered. Bipedal, clawed, heavy. Dan knelt beside her. The indentations were deep, far deeper than they should be. Something big, he muttered. Ulrin frowned. That shouldn't be possible. This planet's gravity is higher than standard. Dan hid a smirk. They never considered him when making those assumptions. He pressed his fingers into the print. Soil was crushed under the creature's weight. Vast, strong, dangerous. Perfect. The hunting party advanced. The distress beacon led them to a clearing where the explorer's dropship rested, or what was left of it. The hull had been peeled open like a tin can. Deep, jagged rents marked the metal. Inside, panels were torn apart, control boards smashed, seats ripped from their hinges. Blood stained the floor, but there was no bodies. Morvash ran her claws along the gouges in the hull. Nothing we know should be able to do this. Dan examined the blood splatter. This wasn't a feeding frenzy, this was precision. Whoever did this, they weren't just killing. Rakesh grunted. Then what were they doing? Dan stood, gripping his rifle. They were hunting. And now, where the prey? Then a sound, a low chittering from the trees. Tazrik froze. We're not alone. Dan tightened his grip. The hunt had begun. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Trees. The jungle swallowed the hunting party whole. Deeper they went, the more the world closed in around them. The canopy thickened overhead, cutting the moonlight into scattered slivers. Thick vines twisted around black bark trees, and the air hung heavy, filled with distant hum of unseen creatures. Dan kept his breathing steady. His eyes flicked from shadow to shadow, cataloging patterns, movements, sounds, airflow. The hunter's mind didn't just track prey. It understood in an environment. Something wasn't right. The jungle was too quiet. They moved in staggered formation. Rakesh took point, the massive Sykar war hunter's heavy footfalls pressing deep into the damp earth. Tazrik skittered alongside him, his serrated hunting blades gleaming in the dim light. Morvash prowled the edges, her feline form a silent blur. Ulrin and Hallis flanked, watching the rear. Dan stayed in the center, his rifle up. His position wasn't just strategy, it was expectation. The weakest member stayed protected. Dan let them believe that. Then the first scream came, a wet, gurgling sound. Dan whipped around just in time to see Ulrin vanish into the undergrowth. 1 second he was there, 7 feet of armored bulk. The next, gone. A violent rustling, a sharp crack, then nothing. No body, no sound, just gone. The hunting party froze. Morvash's ears flattened. Tazrik's mandibles clicked in alarm. Rakesh raised his plasma spear, his slitted eyes narrowing. Dan took a slow breath. That wasn't a kill. A kill would have been loud. A kill would have left a body. This wasn't a slaughter. It was a removal. A culling. Dan's grip on his rifle tightened. We need to move now. Rakesh growled. We do not run. Dan turned to him, his expression dead serious. We're not running. We're repositioning. The Scythekar war hunter glared, but didn't argue. Dan took point. The weakest member leading the charge. Chapter 4. The Trap. They moved fast, no formation, just instinct. Dan's boots barely made a sound as he weaved through the trees. The others followed, silent, wary. Ulrin was gone. The realization sat heavy in their minds. Dan wasn't shaken, not yet. He was focused. He reached the edge of the shallow ravine, 40 feet wide, maybe 20 deep. The ground was loose, too loose. Dan knelt, sifting the dirt through his fingers. Morvash frowned. What are you doing? Dan didn't answer. He was thinking. The tracks in the soil weren't random. They were positioned like someone had placed them, guiding them. His stomach twisted. Shit. Back, he shouted. Too late. The ground collapsed beneath them. Dan dived, twisting midair, catching a branch with one arm. He swung, body coiled tight before landing in a crouch on the solid ground. Tazrik and Morvash weren't so lucky. They tumbled down the slope, vanishing into the shifting dirt and tangled vines. Rakesh barely managed to hold onto a jagged rock, claws scraping as he hauled himself up. Dan's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced. This wasn't a natural landslide. That was set up. Trap. The thought chilled him more than the air. A A predator that sets traps? That was wrong. That was intelligent. Dan's instinct screamed. Vorkish climbed to his feet beside him, growling. They are gone. Dan exhaled sharply. No, they're not dead. The Scyther turned to him. How do you know? Dan pointed to the ravine. Because the bodies aren't here, and that thing doesn't waste its prey. A beat of silence. Then a distant scream echoed from the dark. Tazrik. Still alive. Dan's hands clenched into fist. We're getting them back. Vorkish stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. They moved. Chapter 5. Predator versus Prey. Dan crouched low, heart pounding. He had followed the signs. Subtle disturbances in the jungle. The predator had taken them somewhere. Dan wasn't sure where, but the signs were there. He was watching now, learning. This thing wasn't just hunting. It was hurting them, cutting them off, disrupting their patterns. Dan had done the same thing before back home. He had hunted predators in the wilderness, wolves, cougars, bears. He knew how they thought. This thing, it was doing the same to them, but there was one difference. Dan wasn't just prey. He was human, and humans adapted. His mind pieced it together. The creature had been leading them, yes, but that meant it had a pattern, and patterns could be exploited. Dan turned to Vorkish. I know how we beat it. The war hunter narrowed his eyes. Explain. Dan's jaw tightened, expecting us to act like prey, to run, to hide, to follow its traps. But what happens when prey stops running? Vorkish stared at him. Then a slow, predatory grin spread across his reptilian face. Then it becomes the hunted. Chapter 6. The Reversal. Dan set the plan in motion. They moved slowly now. No panic, no fear. Controlled, purposeful. They weren't running anymore. They were stalking. The jungle wasn't an enemy. It was a weapon. Dan used everything. The terrain, the shifting light, the sounds of the jungle. He made sure every movement was deliberate, blending into the background. Vorkish followed his lead. Dan could feel it now. The presence. The predator was watching them. It knew something was different. Good. Dan's lips curled. Time to turn the table. Distant rustling, a low chittering. The predator was repositioning. It was going to strike. Dan anticipated it. The moment it lunged from the shadows, Dan moved fast. A human should not have been able to dodge that fast. Dan wasn't a normal human. His body, conditioned by Earth's brutal gravity, reacted before the predator could adjust. He pivoted, sidestepped, then brought his rifle up point blank. Boom! The shot ripped into the creature's side, a screech of pain. Black ichor sprayed across the jungle floor. Vorkish was on it in an instant. Plasma spear drove deep into the wounded predator's chest. It snarled and twisted, thrashed, then collapsed, silent. Dan exhaled, heart hammering. The jungle felt different now. The hunter was dead, and Dan Carter was still standing. He turned to Vorkish, breathing hard. The Scythcar warhunter regarded him with something new in his gaze, respect. Dan smirked, rolling his shoulders. Told you I wasn't dead weight. Vorkish bared his fangs. No human. You are a predator. And deep in the jungle, something else watched, and it was still hungry. Chapter 7. The Second Hunt. Dan kept his rifle trained on the fallen creature, his breathing steady. The black ichor pulled beneath it, soaking into the jungle floor. The thing was massive, at least 9 feet tall. All sinewy muscle. Its skin was molted plaque, shifting in the dim light like it absorbed shadows. A long, serrated spine ran down its back, and its elongated skull bore no eyes. Vorkish prodded the corpse with his spear. Not so fearsome dead. Dan wasn't so sure. He crouched, running a hand across the thing's skin. It was too smooth, too efficient, not natural. Then he saw it. The wounds. Not the ones he and Vorkish had inflicted. Older ones. Dan's stomach turned. This thing had been in a fight before, and it had lost. His mind clicked the pieces together. This wasn't the only one. There was something else. Something bigger, stronger, smarter. A chill ran down his spine. We need to find the others now. Vorkish's nostrils flared. He'd understood. They moved. Chapter 8. The Apex Awakens. They found the others too late. Tazrik and Morvash were alive, barely. Suspended in thick sinewy webbing, strung up between the trees like hunting trophies. Dan's gut twisted. They were still breathing. Their chests rose and fell in slow, shallow gasps. Their weapons were gone. Their bodies were covered in deep, precise lacerations, not to kill, but to weaken. The predator was keeping them alive for later. Dan's jaw clenched. He moved fast, pulling his knife, cutting the webbing free. Morvash let out a weak growl, her feline body shuddering as she fell into Dan's arms. "Came," she rasped. Dan didn't waste words. "Damn right I did." Hazreek twitched, mandibles clicking weakly. His chitorous limbs were shaking. Dan hauled him free, slinging one of his arms over his shoulder. Rakesh turned, scanning the trees, his reptilian pupils contracted to slits. "We're not alone." Dan's blood ran cold. A deep, guttural exhalation rolled through the jungle. A presence, a weight in the air. Then from the darkness, it stepped forward. The true apex predator. It was bigger than the first, twice as big. Its shoulders brushed the lower branches, its thick, sinewy limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity, no wasted motion, no sound. Its skin? It moved, not like camouflage, like liquid shadow. Dan's heart pounded. We need to move, now. The beast watched them. It wasn't charging, it was waiting, like it already knew how this ended. Dan tightened his grip on his rifle. Not today, bastard. Chapter 9. The Hunt Turns. They ran. The jungle blurred around them. Dan moved fast, his human endurance kicking in, an evolutionary advantage most aliens didn't have. He could run for hours if he had to. But this thing? It wasn't chasing. Dan's gut twisted. Why wasn't it chasing? He risked a glance back. The predator wasn't following their path. It was moving parallel. Anticipating? Cutting them off? Dan's mind raced. He had hunted back on Earth. He knew what this was. It's not hunting us, it's hurting us. And that meant we're rushing straight into a trap. Dan skidded to a stop. "No, stop!" Rakesh nearly slammed into him. "Why did we stop?" Dan's eyes darted around. It's not chasing, it's controlling. It's leading us somewhere. Rakesh's nostrils flared. He understood. Dan exhaled sharply, his brain working overtime. Think. If he was hunting and his prey figured it out, what would he do? Dan's blood ran cold. He forced their hand. A snapping sound cracked through the jungle. Dan's instincts screamed. He threw himself left just as something huge crashed down from above. The predator had waited for the moment they hesitated, then struck. Dan hit the dirt, rolled, came up with his rifle. The beast moved too fast. It was on Vorkish in an instant. Dan fired 3 shots, center mass. The bullets hit, but the thing barely flinched. Dan's gut clenched. Armor? No, too soft. Regeneration? Maybe. The predator slammed Vorkish into a tree, claws raking across his chest. The reptilian warrior snarled, bringing his plasma spear up, but the creature caught it mid-thrust. Too strong, too fast. Dan had 1 second to act. He saw it, the weak point. Not the chest, not the limbs. The joints. Dan adjusted his aim and fired. The bullet tore through the creature's elbow joint, and for the first time, it reacted. A guttural snarl. The limbs shuddered, its grip loosening. Vorkish tore free. Dan didn't hesitate. "Run! Ridge! Now!" They moved. The predator watched them go. Dan could feel its rage, and worse, its interest. This hunt wasn't over. It had just begun. Chapter 10. The Human Mind. They reached the ridge. Dan's mind raced. He'd injured it, but it wasn't bleeding the way it should. It had weak points, but they weren't fatal. Not yet. He turned to Vorkish. That spear, how hot is the plasma charge? Vorkish blinked. Hot enough to burn through starship holes. Dan exhaled. That's our kill shot. The reptilian warrior narrowed his eyes. How do we strike? Dan's lips pressed into a thin line. We don't. Vorkish frowned. Explain. Dan smirked. It's a predator, the best there is. He nodded towards the jungle, and predators don't expect their prey to fight smart. Vorkish bared his fangs, understanding. Dan checked his rifle. We don't fight it. He looked towards the jungle. We make it fight us. Chapter 11. Setting the Trap. Dan knelt in the dirt, tracing lines in the soil. He used its own instincts against it. Vorkish watched, his reptilian eyes narrowed. Explain. Dan tapped his temple. It's smarter than us, stronger, faster, but it still thinks like a hunter, and hunters have patterns. He pointed at the rough map. It's controlling the battlefield, not just attacking. It herded us, cut us off, waited for the right moment. That means it doesn't just rely on brute force. It relies on strategy. Vorkish's nostrils flared. So we deny it control. Dan nodded. Exactly. Turn the terrain against it. Force it into a fight on our terms. He looked up. eyes gleaming with grim determination. And then we kill the bastard. Chapter 12. The Bait. Dan led the charge through the jungle, his every step intentional. The ridge sloped downward into a natural choke point, a gully filled with sharp, jagged rock formations and dense undergrowth, perfect for an ambush. They had one shot at this. Dan slid into place, pressing himself against a massive root. Orkish crouched nearby, plasma spear at the ready. Tazrik and Morvash, still weak from their injuries, had been positioned safely behind cover, but with orders to fire the moment things went south. Dan took a slow breath. Now came the hard part, baiting the monster. He didn't have to wait long. A low, guttural growl rumbled through the trees. The predator was near, watching, waiting. Dan forced himself to move. He stepped into the open, rifle lowered, making himself look vulnerable. The jungle went silent. Then a rush of movement. Dan rolled aside just as the beast dropped from above. It landed with a bone-rattling impact, the force shaking the ground. Its liquid black form rippled, shifting like a shadow come to life. Dan didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired. Not at the creature, but at the rock wall behind it. The shot ricocheted, echoing through the gully. The beast twitched, reacting, not to pain, but to instinct. It had been hunted before. Dan grinned. Good. That means it knows what fear is. Chapter 13. The Kill. The creature moved like a shadow given flesh, a blur of liquid darkness against the tangled green of the jungle. It didn't hesitate. It didn't posture. It attacked. Dan barely had time to throw himself aside as the beast lunged, claws flashing in the dim light. The wind howled as the strike missed his skull by inches. But it wasn't a clean dodge. One of its razor-edged limbs clipped his shoulder, sending a white-hot bolt of pain down his arm. Too fast. It was too fast. Dan hit the ground and rolled, instincts kicking in. He came up with his rifle already firing, but the shots burned harmlessly against its shifting hide. Then came the screams. Morvash behind him wasn't fast enough. Dan turned in time to see the Helix hunter ripped from cover. The beast's massive claws tore through bone and muscle, sending the alien crashing into a tree. Morvash coughed black blood, his chest shredded, limbs spasming, still alive, barely. Dan moved, but the beast was already on Vorkish. The reptilian warrior roared, meeting its charge head-on, plasma spear in hand. He thrust, but the creature was smart. It twisted, using its own injured limb as bait, letting Vorkish commit to the attack. Then it countered. The thing's tail lashed out, a massive whip-like appendage that struck Vorkish in the ribs with bone-crunching force. The impact lifted him off the ground, sent him smashing into the rocks with enough force that Dan swore he heard something break. Vorkish didn't get up. Damn it! Damn it! Dan fired again, this time aiming for its head, its eyes, anything that looked vulnerable. It was like shooting smoke. The rounds hit, but the monster didn't falter. It turned toward him now, a new target. Dan barely had time to register the movement before it was on him. He tried to dodge, too slow. A bladed limb raked across his side, slicing through armor and into flesh. Dan felt the pain before he saw the blood, a deep gaping wound across his ribs. His vision blurred, his knees buckled, and the thing stood over him. Its breath was hot, reeking of decay, its mouth lined with too many teeth opened wide. Dan saw his death. Then, a plasma blast seared through the air. The creature recoiled, hissing as a bolt of pure energy struck its side. Tazrik! The insectoid hunter stood, barely able to aim, his mandibles clicking in defiance. He fired again, this time hitting the beast's neck. For the first time it reacted. It screeched. Dan didn't waste the opening. Adrenaline, pure survival instinct took over. Ignoring the pain in his ribs, he lunged, grabbing a fallen plasma spear from the dirt. The beast turned back to him just as Dan drove the weapon straight through its torso. It shrieked. The jungle shook. Dan felt every muscle scream in agony as he pushed the blade deeper, twisting, trying to find something vital. The monster thrashed, one final desperate attempt to take him with it. Its claws raked across his chest, tearing into flesh. Dan held on. Then it stopped. The beast shuddered, its body convulsing, a low, guttural gurgle rumbling from its throat. Its limbs twitched, then went limp. It collapsed, dead. Dan stumbled back, gasping, his vision darkening at the edges, blood pouring from his wounds, but he was still standing, barely. The jungle was silent again. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Vorkish groaned. "You stabbed it?" Dan chuckled, voice hoarse. "Yeah." He spit blood. Figured it was worth a shot. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was Tazrik laughing. Chapter 14, The Aftermath. They made it back to the dropship at sunrise. Tazriq and Morvash were weak but alive. Morkish had a deep new scar across his chest, which he wore with pride. And Dan had proved himself. The galaxy saw humans as weak, inferior, a lesser species. But today, as the ship took off, leaving the cursed jungle behind, Morkish sat beside him. After a long pause, he rumbled, "You are not prey, human." Dan grinned. Damn right. The hunt was over, but his legend? It was just beginning. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. If you made it this far, it's safe to say you liked it. Don't forget to check out another great video, like the video, and subscribe if you want to see future great videos just like this one.